Hola amigos! Coming up in this episode we have...
Well, I'd never heard of Pippi Longstocking, but in the end I found it. He might as well have been from another planet. An estimated 200 tons would have been paid in tribute, worth around $12.5 billion in today's money. Darwin spent a full day on the 1,880-metre mountain, and he noted almost every part of the mountain had been drilled by attempts to open gold mines. There was even a small pit on the very summit.
So I'm in the Hotel Socos, in the arid central coast of Chile, a few hundred kilometres north of Santiago, the capital. Having had a number of my rear spokes repaired, I packed my bag. Today being Sunday, I hoped I wouldn't run into too much traffic. Unfortunately, my helmet cam malfunctioned today, so I've got no on-the-road video footage. We'll just have to make do with computer map animations. Sorry about that. First stop was the gas station up on the Pan American, where I happened to run into a Brazilian couple riding a BMW. They were also heading south, and the guy, Ricardo Maya, was amused enough to take a snap of me as I took a snap of him. They must have stopped for lunch because they didn't pass me for a couple of hours later. I saw them overtake me down the road. We spoke a mixture of Gringo Spanish and Portuguese, and we swapped stickers. Here's his sticker. Now I actually had to ride north a bit to find a place to turn around, get over the traffic barrier and start heading south along the Pan American. Next up was one of the strangest things I've ever seen, and I'll never forget it. I looked to my right, and if you could imagine a steep but narrow river valley where it reaches the ocean, and there appeared to be a giant roll of white fog, the Garua coastal fog that they have there, and it looked like it was just being pushed back and rolled by some giant invisible hand. It was actually some wind from the east, I guess, and you can't really see in this photo, but underneath the roller you could see white breakers of the waves of the ocean breaking. And I saw that phenomena further down too whenever I looked to my right on the coast. Then I stopped and took a video of these guys. At first I didn't know what they were, but they're donkeys. I thought they might have been horses. Probably wild, and they're very well suited to dry climates. You might think that they outcompete the native fauna, things like guanacos, alpacas, but they're a type of camel and they can actually survive dry areas as well. The environment changed about 10,000 years ago when all the large animals, the so-called megafauna, went extinct. The thing is, hoofed animals went extinct 10,000 years ago until they were reintroduced by the Spanish. But before that, for 2.5 million years, they evolved in South America. So the natural habitat can support hoofed animals, and some scientists even think it is good to reintroduce them after they were extinct for 10,000 years, because that is just a blink of an eyelid in evolutionary terms. And many of the plants and botany here need their seeds to be digested by large animals. And one study said the disappearance of large animals 10,000 years ago actually reduced the seed dispersal by 2/3. So in one way, they're actually good for the environment. Next, I saw these giant wind farms, Canela 1 and Canela 2. In the case of Chile, wind power makes sense. They can and do have hydroelectric dams, but the tectonic instability and earthquakes of the Andes make it a bit of a risky way of generating electricity. These majestic giants, look at them, slowly turning, and at 120 metres tall, that's 30% higher than the Statue of Liberty. They are doing a good job, I reckon. And there's dozens of them here. Next was another one of these lonely anamitas. This poor guy, he died in 2010, aged 49. And someone's gone to the trouble of putting electric lights in front of that little casita and water bottles to drip feed those plants that are growing there. Not long after, my odometer ticked over 4,000 kilometres. I've been on the road 33 days, and that's slightly more than from Sydney to Perth. A bit further south, near the town of La Ligua, I saw blood on the road and policemen standing next to a damaged motorbike. And they just waved me through. A bit further, near the town of Catapilco, a radar policeman pulled me over, checked my documents. That's the first time someone's checked my documents. And I was a little bit worried because I'd been unable to buy accident insurance for the bike, but he didn't ask for that. He just asked for my license and ownership papers, and he was quite cheerful. And then he said yes, motorcycles had suffered heridas graves, which means serious injuries, and taken to hospital.
getting close to my destination now, but not before passing two very historic places, Quillota and the valley of Aconcagua. The first official Spanish expedition here was headed by Diego de Almagro, a conquistador who'd been with Pizarro for many years and had come all the way from Cusco. But when he got here, he found he wasn't the first Spaniard. There was a man called Gonzalo Calvo de Barrientos. He was also present at the capture of Atahualpa, but fell out of favor with Pizarro, who ordered both his ears cut off, then imprisoned him with Atahualpa, the Inca king. But Atahualpa helped him escape and told him the safest place for him was the far south of his empire, down in central Chile. There, Gonzalo Calvo befriended a local chieftain called Michimalonco and settled in Quillota. It's interesting to note baldness is extremely rare amongst native South American people. And the local elite were called orejones, or big ears, because their custom was to elongate it with a large earplug as a sign of authority. Reportedly, Pedro Calvo de Barrientos was bald and earless. So initially they must have viewed him with awe, suspicion, bewilderment. He might as well have been from another planet. When Almagro arrived in 1536, Calvo met him and brokered a peace between the Spaniards and the locals, and even gifting them some gold. Now down here we're thousands of miles from where the Spanish captured the Inca king, Atahualpa. But one of the interpreters, a young man called Felipillo, he had been recruited by Pizarro and accompanied Almagro as an interpreter. He had been in important negotiations in Quito, Cusco, and even Panama with Pizarro, and had been present at the execution of Atahualpa. However, Felipillo himself was not an Inca, and he later betrayed both the Spanish and the Incas. In Quillota, he incited the native tribespeople who had been paying tribute to the Incas to rise up and kill the Spanish horses because they knew that was where their power lay. Calvo informed Almagro of his treason. They hunted him down, executed him, and had his body quartered. He was only 22 years old. Still today, in modern Peruvian slang, a Felipillo means a traitor, kind of like a Benedict Arnold. Almagro was disappointed with the small amount of gold he found, and facing increasing hostilities from the natives, he was guided north back to Cusco by Calvo. Arriving in Cusco in 1537, Almagro fell out with two of the Pizarro brothers, and there was a battle between the Spaniards which Almagro lost, and he was executed by Pizarro. Calvo, nobody's sure what happened to him. One source says he died in the battle fighting against Pizarro, another said he returned to Chile and lived happily ever after. 3 years later, Valdivia left Cusco on another expedition in January 1540. Arriving about a year later, Valdivia also ran into Michimalonco. Michimalonco was a Mapuche chieftain who had been educated by the Incas in Cusco, then sent back as a kind of local governor. Michimalonco was already paying an annual tribute to the Inca in the form of alluvial gold panned from the river right here called Maga Maga. He showed the deposit to Valdivia's men. There was a huge processing plant, including scores of crucibles where the gold was melted down. Soon the workforce was ordered to increase production. So, ironically, unlike Almagro, who returned to be executed after finding no gold in Chile, just 3 years later, Valdivia had stumbled upon one of the richest alluvial gold resources in the history of the world, the Maga Maga alluvial gold deposits. The next 2 decades were golden years for the Spanish. Almost 10 tons of gold was extracted under conquistador control. In today's prices, that's over 610 million American dollars. Of course, the native labor force felt exploited, and there were several violent uprisings that saw the Spanish killed or running for cover. But if the 9.8 tons extracted by the Spanish sounds a lot, some historians calculate that's just a drop in the ocean compared to what the Mapuche paid the Incas, based on the fact that Almagro intercepted and seized the last annual tribute to Atahualpa, and it weighed 552 kilograms. So in the roughly 80 years that the Chileans were subjugated by the Incas, an estimated 200 tons would have been paid in tribute, worth around $12.5 billion in today's money. Continuing south along the Panamericana, there was a tall mountain on my left called Cerro La Campana, or Bell Mountain. The summit of this mountain offers stupendous views up and down the coast for miles, even as far as Valparaiso. Charles Darwin, who climbed this mountain in 1834, noted there are groves of high-altitude palm trees growing at over 4,500 feet on this mountain. He wrote about how these palms have their crowns lopped off, and then they continue to produce up to 90 gallons of sweet sap over several months, which which then, concentrated by boiling, creates an edible type of treacle. The species he was referring to is scientifically called Jubea chilensis, or Chilean wine palm, because a wine can be brewed from its sap. Darwin spent a full day on the 1,880-metre mountain, and he noted almost every part of the mountain had been drilled by attempts to open gold mines. There was even a small pit on the very summit. His observation accords with the many legends of Spanish hoards and Jesuit treasures hidden on this mountain in these old mining tunnels. And some of these legends have a credible basis in history. And the history of this valley goes back a lot further than the Spanish or even the Incas. I next stopped in the town of Quilpué to buy gasoline, so I wouldn't have to hunt around and buy it in the port city of Valparaiso. Quilpué has its own unique place in history, as it was where the natives used to mine flint used in spear tips and the Nyachi bloodletting ceremony that I mentioned in the last episode. In fact, a recent discovery by a man digging for building sand discovered teeth from an extinct mammoth, an Inca statuette, and a flint spear tip thought to be more than 15,000 years old, making it one of the oldest yet found in the Americas. This last section, it's a pity my helmet cam wasn't working because the Sunday afternoon sun was shining over the deep blue South Pacific Ocean, bathing everything in a golden yellow glow. Added to the fact that I was getting a free run due to it being a Sunday afternoon with no traffic, coupled with the rustic architecture I was seeing left, right and centre, well, you just have to take my word for it. It was one of the most enjoyable rides I ever had. But then in the southern end of town, near the docks, I started having a few problems. I was looking for a guest house called Villa Kunterbund. The German lady who owned it said it was very easy to find. It was on a corner, a big building with a painting of Pippi Longstocking. Well, I'd never heard of Pippi Longstocking, but in the end I found it. After being led into a Fort Knox type gateway, I parked at Wacky next to some bikes with European license plates, and I was shown my own room. This place really had character, and 3 stories high. It was nice to be in a place that catered specially for bikers, because I had 3 important jobs: get my rear spokes fixed properly, wait for my credit cards to arrive, and maybe have to catch a flight home depending on my father's medical condition. The top of the building had commanding views of all of Valparaiso. I was happy here. And these 4-legged furry friends were happy I was here as well, by the look of it. A little bit boisterous, as you can see.
That's all for this episode, amigos, but coming up in the next episode, we have...
Valparaiso had a faded charm that was unique. Check out these cable cars. They've been operating for almost 130 years.
That whip you have, what's it for? Yeah?
Whip your...
Hello, Senor Pablo Neruda. What's he doing? Well, that's a rough and ready way to keep the buses running.